they would show up at the hospital like, hey, you guys got a refrigerator where I can put my insulin? I'm like, yeah, the refrigerator's in Germany, dude, getting paid, $300,000 a year. They were just throwing money at these contractors. I was seeing crazy combat trauma, gunshot wounds and heart attack. But then also I had this like huge pool of ridiculously unhealthy American contractors.
So do I need more muscle, or is it more maintenance at this time?
I was eating like cookie dough, raw cookie dough.
Interesting.
Everybody looks 10 to 20 years older than their actual like chronological age.
I need more testosterone.
Exactly. Poor eating habits, obesity, smoking. Everybody's on fentanyl and meth.
You're not going to have 2 kids at your schedule.
The U.S. healthcare system is collapsing. You got to get as healthy as you can because you don't want to get sucked into that system.
All right, today I have Andrew Winge. He's a combat ER doctor. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. He has a men's health business that's super interesting. He's helped me personally in jiu-jitsu, but he's really helped me get in shape and get my eating and just incredible resource for this information. So good to have you, man.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
I know we tried to do this a while ago, but I messed up the schedule. So we got it. We finally figured it out.
Yeah, so. You were definitely my top pick just because you do so many cool things with men's health. That you look around the world and see not just America anymore; it's the world.
It's the entire world.
Yeah,
the entire world is. The health of the average citizen is not good, and it's getting worse. It's absolutely getting worse.
Yeah. Well, we need more, not just doctors, but people that know this information, because what I find is most doctors that I've encountered don't really know much. They don't bring a lot to the table in that case. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough because your training as a physician is very much they talk about it being a sick care system, and it's true. Doctors don't know what to do with you if you are, let's just say, average. You don't have an identifiable disease condition that they learn in a book. If you're one of those people, but let's say you want to be super healthy, let's say you want to be in the top 5% for your age group, we don't get any training in that. I never learned how to do that in med school. I learned how to take care of congestive heart failure. I know how to take care of grandma's diabetes. You have appendicitis. You're having a heart attack. That's the stuff I do in the emergency room all day. But as far as, like you coming to me as a former professional athlete, if you're like, hey, I want to get back into the shape that I was in my mid-20s, and I want to be in the lowest risk category, for heart disease and for diabetes, there's very few physicians that know how to do that. And it's not their fault. It's just they're just not trained to do it. It's not part of their everyday life. I mean, my background is in family medicine and emergency medicine. So I did a residency in family medicine, which is kind of like cradle to grave care on the outpatient side. And then I also did an emergency medicine residency. So, I take care of like gunshot wounds and heart attacks and, stuff on the extreme. But it's very difficult to find somebody that understands, taking somebody to that top 5%, in terms of health. And that's one of the things you came to me about is that you're like, I want to feel like I did in my 20s and 30s, you know, and a lot of times that is possible to a certain extent. We have to have realistic expectations. It's not always possible. If you're 70, I'm sorry, that's probably not going to happen. But you can be a kick-ass 70-year-old. The average 70-year-old that I see in the emergency department is in really bad shape, and their quality of life is terrible. So it's really sad for me to see that because I know it's entirely preventable. That's the thing.
The education piece, I just think that they're never what you're doing is there's such a huge, enormous market for it, but there just never was a specialty, like you said. Like you're literally the first. I've heard of him. I heard people tell me about it, but when I met you, you're like, this is what I do. I'm like, well, damn, dude, you could do this, nonstop. I want to circle back to all of this and spend most of our time on the men's health, but I do want to get your background because you have a extensive background that's set you up for enormous ability to have success, and that starts with your military. Tell me how you got in the military. Give us a brief, what happened in the military, and then med school and that whole path.
I was one of those kids that always knew he wanted to be a doctor when I was a little kid, and don't ask me why, but that's just kind of like from like age 8, I just was always like, I'm going to be a doctor one day, and of course you have no idea what that means. So all through high school, that's kind of what I geared myself, towards. But in high school, I played football, and I actually played rugby in high school and in college. So I wasn't an athlete at the level you were, but I was definitely pretty athletic, and I got into lifting. And I really liked strength, the strength aspect of training. So I got into like competitive powerlifting. But the whole time, like the eye on the prize was always like, I got to get into medical school. So yeah, so I went to University of Oregon, and I got a degree in exercise and movement science. And to get into med school, they don't care what your undergraduate degree is. People think you have to be a biology major, but I got a buddy who was a Spanish major. I have another buddy who was he got a bachelor's in philosophy. So that as long as you do your pre-med classes, you should just sort of, I tell students, just like pick a major that you're interested in. So I did exercise and movement science, which most of my classmates were all like pre-physical therapy. So it was a mix of like exercise physiology and maybe like kinesiology,
Gotcha.
Sort of thing. So, which was cool because I was obviously like really interested in that. But so I applied to a bunch of medical schools. I got into a handful, and at that point, I had not really thought about how I'm going to pay for this.
ROTC?
Yeah. So it just didn't really enter into my mind. And even back then, this is in the early 90s, I mean, medical school was expensive. It's outrageously expensive now. It's almost like criminal what they charge these kids these days. But I was not going to ask my parents to float me a loan. For med school, I looked at I obviously could have taken student loans, but I applied to the Uniformed Services University, which is a pretty well-kept secret. You can think of it as like West Point for doctors. So it's a military-run medical school. It's in Bethesda, Maryland. So it's on the campus of the National Naval Medical Center where the president goes.
Yep.
Yeah, and Walter Reed is there, and NIH. So it's kind of nestled in an area where there's a lot going on not only just politically, but in the military and DoD medical side of things. So anyway, long story short, I got in there, and I got commissioned as a little second lieutenant in the Air Force. And I was in a group of, I think there was 165 of us in each class, and split pretty evenly between Army, Navy, and Air Force. And every now and then, if they had funding, there'd be like a few of these public health service students, that would go in there. But we were all on active duty, had to wear a uniform every day. And I got really good training there, I have to admit. I rotated with Hopkins students and Harvard students, and I have to say, like, the students in my class, like, we were just as good as they were. At least I thought we were.
So the qualities, there's no
it's
difference.
It's a regular medical school.
Okay.
The curriculum was the same, although the only difference was, we had to take a standard med school curriculum, but it is a military medical school. So in addition to anatomy, physiology, pathology, biochem, I had a year of nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare training.
Wow.
And then you don't get your summers off. You have to go out with an operational unit. So I rotated at the SEER school, which is the Search, Evasion, Rescue, Escape, I think. Yeah. At Fairchild Air Force Base. So that's where they teach pilots who are shot down how to survive.
Survival.
And then they capture you and they take you to a POW camp and they rough you up. And they make it as realistic as possible. So that's what I did in the summer. But yeah, other than that, it was a regular medical school. And then I loved all of my rotations, so I really didn't know what I wanted to specialize in. And the problem at the military school is you pretty much, there's a match that you go through as a medical student, and where you match with a residency program, which is what your specialty is going to be. So you're like, I want to be an anesthesiologist. Okay, so you apply to all of these anesthesia programs all over the country, and typically that happens. Usually, I think on the civilian side, you find out sometime I think it's in March roughly, but the military has its own match, and being at the medical school where I was, I had to go. I could not go to a civilian program. So if I wanted to go to University of Washington, for anesthesia training, no, I had to be within the military's own system. So they have a match, and it's several months. I don't remember exactly when I found out where I was going, but it was probably in December or November of my 4th year of med school. So I still hadn't finished out all of my rotations. So it's kind of unfair. Like, you have to pick your specialty, which you're going to be stuck in for the rest of your career.
Oh, yeah.
With like basically just with 1 year of clinical rotations under your belt.
So you don't necessarily
really know.
It's kind of like getting your major when you're a freshman in college and then go, well, I don't want to do that anymore. Like, nah.
It's too late,
It's
right?
too late.
Sorry, buddy, you signed,
Yeah.
right? So, so anyway, so I ended up, because I liked everything, I was like, well, I'll do family medicine, because family medicine does everything. You know, you deliver babies, you work in the ICU, you get to work in the ER, you do a little bit of everything, and it's a good. You get a very good, broad, like general knowledge base of just general medicine, you know, and so that's what I did. So that was a 3-year program. So I graduated in 2000, and then I did my residency at Eglin Air Force Base, which is in Fort Walton Beach, so near Pensacola. So sounds like a great place to do residency, right? Beautiful beaches and stuff like that. But you know, the reality is, like, that was pre-2003 when they put in these work hour restrictions in 2003, which were you can't work more than 80 hours in a week. And there was a few other restrictions in there, but
That's a lot of hours, though.
yeah. Well, I did my residency before that.
Okay.
There were no hour
Oh,
restrictions,
wow, okay,
right?
yeah.
So I got to see the beach a lot, but it was like through a glass window, you know, at Eglin Air Force Base.
Oh,
So,
gotcha.
so yeah, I might as well have gone to Detroit, you know, because it just, like, I didn't get to enjoy the sunshine at all. Now, ironically, my last duty station before I got out of the Air Force was back at Eglin Air Force Base as a staff physician in the ER, so I actually did get to enjoy it at that point. But yeah, so I did a family med residency, really liked it, and then I got board certified in family medicine, went out, and my first duty station out of residency was at Mountain Home Air Force Base, so not too far from here, near Boise.
Oh, wow.
So I was a staff doc out there, and did some inpatient medicine, clinic medicine, and I ended up being the medical director of the emergency department out there. I think just kind of by default. We had an internal medicine doc who was the ER medical director, and I think, yeah, she had a baby, I think, so she was out for a long period of time. Maybe she got deployed. But basically, I was like voluntold, like, to take over that position, right?
Voluntold.
So, voluntold, yeah. Hey, I've got a great opportunity for you, you know. So, oh, yes, sir. So anyway, yeah, I took over that position, and so I kind of gravitated towards more urgent care, emergency medicine type stuff while I was there. But the thing that really piqued my interest was I got deployed to Balad Air Base in Iraq, and this was in 2005. So it was, and I got there right as they were kind of mopping up Fallujah. Now, I went there as a family medicine trained doctor, but I was put into an emergency medicine slot because there was just a
Shortage?
critical shortage.
Yeah.
So there were a handful of us who were family medicine docs, thrown in with a bunch of trauma surgeons and ER docs, and let me tell you, it was very intense. It was very, like, on a level that is hard to describe. Back in 2005. So I got a mini trauma fellowship there over that course of those 6 months, and I really, like, I enjoyed it. I was like, okay, this is kind of my thing. Like, I figured out that I really like taking care of, like, sick, complicated patients. And the reality is, in family medicine, outside of residency, I hate to say this, but I was kind of like a glorified PA. And handing out Kleenex and Motrin, you know, and I would have a few, like, complicated patients, but it was sort of like, I don't need 7 years of graduate training to do what I'm doing here.
Yeah, just get some rest. If it's 3 weeks, come back.
And half the time it's like, you don't even need me for this. Like, if you just ate better, and, like, I don't know, took some Sudafed, like, you don't need to come in here. So anyway, so it was not, I was kind of getting burned out with that sort of mundane kind of care, but the critical care part of things with gunshot wounds and heart attacks, and you'd be surprised, there were so many heart attacks out in Iraq because all these contractors were coming out.
Oh, interesting.
The money was so good for those guys that they would fudge their medical records. You know, they would show up at the hospital like, hey, you guys got a refrigerator where I can put my insulin? I'm like, yeah, the refrigerator's in Germany, dude. Like, you're out of here. But they would lie on their forms. So these guys, you know, I remember taking care of a guy who he'd had a heart attack 3 months prior, which would have disqualified him from working there. But he lied about it. And so what did he do? He got off the plane, had another heart attack, and showed up in my ER.
Yeah.
But he's doing it because he's getting paid, $300,000 a year.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
kind of money those guys were, they were just throwing money at these contractors. So I was seeing crazy combat trauma, but then also I had this like huge pool of like ridiculously unhealthy American contractors who were there just trying to make money.
So you were doing both civilian
Yeah, we took care of
and
civilians, yeah.
same area, or were you kind of
hospital,
rotating?
same hospital. Yeah,
Interesting.
it was a
Okay.
big, theater combat hospital. So there was Baghdad and Balad were like the two big army posts there, and the two big trauma centers. So pretty much all the major trauma in the country would go to like one of those two places. We would stabilize them, and then either return them to duty or fly them to Germany. So they would, they had these really fancy flying ICUs basically.
Like a C-17s?
In a C-17, decked out with like a full ICU in the back. And there were, dedicated teams that would fly those guys out.
How do they
So
get
it's
the
super
amount
interesting.
of the amount of people? Like I was just thinking about this, like the amount of doctors needed. You just don't, when you think of the military, you don't think
huge.
of that many doctors. Like
Right.
I know an army doctor,
Yeah.
a surgeon, and you're like, well, that's the only one I know, and you're the
Right.
other one.
Right.
So it's like there has to be a lot. So
Well, there is and there isn't, and they, there were always critical shortages because it's the government, right?
Yeah.
So they never anticipate properly what their needs will be, and so they're always either cutting people because we have too many, or oh shit, we need more.
Yep.
And what do we do? And that's how I ended up in that ER billet as a family med doc.
But you adjusted pretty fast. You feel like you adjusted.
I was pretty lucky. Yeah, I mean, I had taken as many trauma courses as I could, but the reality is, as a family medicine doc, you don't get the critical care training that an ER physician
the high
does.
intensity.
So yeah, at the end of that, I got lucky because there were two ER docs that I spent a lot of time with there who just happened to be on the teaching staff at Wilford Hall Medical Center and Brooke Army Medical Center, which is where the Army and the Air Force does their ER training. And so I was like, hey man, I'm interested in retraining, and they we got to be all like really good friends. So they basically put in a good word for me because I felt like I did a good job over there. And so, I had to get a special waiver. It went all the way up to a 2-star. But I think the reason I got in is because these two guys knew me personally and vouched for me. There's a lot it's all about who you know.
Yeah, who you know,
what
I was gonna say, the typical
because in
way.
those closed door sessions, which I have been in at other times in my career, they'll just say, all right, who's this guy, Andrew? Like, give me the straight scoop. And then, if you get a thumbs up from someone like in that position, you're pretty much, that really helps. So anyway, long story short, I went back and I did a full 3-year emergency medicine residency. I'd already been a physician for 6 years. And I kind of was under the impression like, I'll get some credit for my other time, right? Like I don't have to do all these. I don't have to be an intern again, do I? And they're like, yeah, actually you do. I was like,
Is that why you were in there for 17 years?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so anyway, I did the whole thing from zero to hero. So I showed up, day one. I was a mid-level major with a bunch of brand new, fresh captains. Who had been doctors for about 2 weeks. I'm talking about my classmates, and I had been a physician already for a total of 6 years. I'd already had a serious major deployment under my belt, but I had to be an intern again, and just.
When did you when did you get out? Like, what was that transition like? I mean, this 17
Yeah.
years we could talk all day about that.
So
how did that
eventually, 2013, I separated, and that was after 17 years of active duty. So I had some reserve time after that. But yeah, it was definitely time to get out. I put on lieutenant colonel, and things start in the military. It's so much worse now, but like they do stop being fun as you get higher and higher in rank. I like seeing patients. I like taking care of sick people. It's
More
what I'm
administration,
trained to do.
maybe?
Yeah, there's a lot more administrative stuff. Things were just starting to get a little woke back in 2013, so and they've gotten obviously way past that now. But so anyway, I sat and then on top of that, like my dad got bladder cancer, so and we didn't really know what his prognosis was going to be. So I was like, you know what, this is probably a time. I was in Florida, so I was like, I need to come back to Oregon and settle down.
Yeah.
And get
So
out.
you just-
So that's what I did. Yeah.
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 Just
So
transition into an ER doctor, what you're doing now.
I did, yeah. So I got a locums job, which is, essentially like some part-time work. I worked out on the coast for a while. I hopped from like ER to ER, and I worked with these locums companies, which are just basically like staffing
companies.
Yeah, so they make up shortfalls in staffing.
Kind of like the traveling nurse.
It's exactly like that, yeah. And the pay is pretty good, and I got to travel the state, and I didn't really know what I wanted to.
Now you're in Lebanon?
And how I ended
Lebanon or Lebanon?
It's Lebanon.
Okay.
Yeah, Lebanon.
Yeah, so you're commuting, what do you have, 3 shifts a week?
It varies. So I'm down to a full-time ER schedule, it kind of varies from hospital to hospital. Most places, it's about 12 to 14 shifts a month.
Okay.
And, give or take.
Kind of like a firefighter, maybe?
Yeah.
Where you're just like, I'm going to do 24 hours on or
Yeah,
whatever, and then I'm going to take 3.
do that. So I've got family practice buddies. In fact, I've got one that he does 72-hour shifts at these little rinky-dink rural ERs in Alabama. And so, and there's some I've heard that you do 5-day shifts. Like you live in the hospital for 5 days. I couldn't do it.
And then you come home for a couple weeks.
Yeah. So my shifts, typically where I work, they're like 10 to 12 hours. But they're balls to the wall, like really intense shifts. And the population out there where I work, I mean, it's the same everywhere. I've got buddies in Texas, still in Florida, and we always compare notes. But it's hard to imagine, like, talking to someone like yourself, just how sick the U.S. population is, how unhealthy they are. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And it's even gotten worse. I've been out there like 7, 8 years now. And I thought it was bad when I was there on day one, but the pathology that I see at this medium-sized community ER, it's like 25 beds, which is not big, is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Every day, it's cancer, diabetes, and we're taking off people's toes, and we're having heart attacks, and everybody looks 10 to 20 years older than their actual like chronological age, and it's. There's a lot we can go into all the reasons for that, but it's lifelong poor eating habits, obesity, smoking. Everybody's on fentanyl and meth. It seems like, and I mean it just like burns the candle at both ends for these people. So it's getting. I've had some weird moments in my the last 10 years. Definitely in my 40s, where I was working cardiac arrests on men who were my age or younger. And it's you're looking at them. You don't know much about them because they're coming in, cardiac arrest. You don't have time to get on the computer. But after the fact, you look and see, oh, that guy's 40. Okay, I was 46 years old. Oh, I'm 47. So it gets a little. You start seeing like, if you don't take care of yourself, you know this as well as anyone. When you start hitting your late 30s and early 40s, if you have not started thinking about this kind of stuff, the wheels start to come off. And definitely by the time you hit 50, if you just do what the average American does, the wheels have really come off. And that's when you get to come see me in the emergency department with your first heart attack. I routinely see guys in their early 50s, late 40s with their first strokes. Many of them are undiagnosed diabetics. So I was like, hey man, your blood sugar is 300.
They had no idea.
They had no idea.
Because they just don't go to the doctor.
They don't go to the doctor.
Yeah.
Why would I do that?
Yeah. No, it's interesting because you just pay attention. Like
Yeah.
when you're walking around this world, pay attention. And even, hey, we spent 2 months in the Philippines. In the Philippines, it's like, we're exporting, you said this, and I was thinking this, but you said it and we laughed. It's like the U.S. exports unhealthy obesity.
Yeah, obesity is the number one export in the United States.
They're eating the processed food, and it's actually like, that the country's getting wealthy if they're getting fat. In Southeast Asia, these countries, you start noticing the kids, and it's not even the parents, it's the kids are obese at this young age, and you're just like, and they're eating garbage.
So that's the tragic thing is like, I specifically remember there were 2 teenage girls in my patient population when I was a family med doc, and they were both type 2 diabetics. And it was so rare even then. Like we actually had conferences about these people because it was, this is such a medical anomaly, right? To see a teenager who's a type 2. Now type 1's different, anybody can get that. But type 2, very rare. I routinely see teenagers now with type 2 diabetes. Yeah. Routinely.
It's just the habits are started at a young age.
Exactly.
Right? Well, this kind of leads us into like your men's health thing because there's, you just don't, people don't hear about it. They're popping up more now, like
Yeah.
like with the the testosterone stuff, but that's just
Yeah.
one part of it, right?
Yeah.
Like, but that's kind of like maybe if you took care of yourself, you might not need that,
Correct.
right? And
Correct.
so it's like, let's talk about, what people need to be doing and thinking about, because this is ridiculous what's
It's
happening,
pretty
man.
bad.
Yeah.
It's pretty bad. So I don't have the answers, right? Like, no, I don't, there's not one solution to this, but you did say something that goes a long way with me. And that's like, you just have to start thinking about this. Like, look at your own family. I'll use myself as an example. My dad is still with us, actually. We thought he was going to die in 2013 of bladder cancer, but he's still here. He's just about to turn 90. But he had his first angioplasty, which is where they put a balloon in your arteries, and he had cholesterol buildup in his iliac arteries and was having pain when he walked. I think he was 53.
Wow.
So,
Was he overweight?
a little bit,
But not
like
bad.
not
But this
not
is
bad.
internal stuff.
This
that
is
you can't
internal
see.
stuff, and so, long story short, in my family we have a genetic cholesterol issue. It's something called lipoprotein A, Lp(a). You've got Lp(a) too. We know all about it, right? So, highly atherogenic, like 4 times the risk of stroke, 3 times the risk of heart attack. It's a big deal. So, when my dad was diagnosed with that, I got myself checked, and sure enough, I have it. So I saw what my dad went through, and that's why you have to look at your family members. A lot of this, there's a certain inevitability that people feel like that comes with aging, and that's one of the things I have to talk to them about a lot, is to deconstruct that and be like, listen, you don't, just because your dad went down this pathway doesn't mean you have to. And just because everybody who's in their 50s around you is walking with a cane, has ED and is morbidly obese, doesn't mean you have to be. In fact, there's no reason if you take this stuff seriously, especially the earlier the better, in your 50s, you can't be climbing mountains. You should be out, you should be able to do a 10-mile ruck in your 50s.
Yeah,
Totally. If barring major orthopedic issues and stuff like that, like that's outside of your control. So this idea that of what aging looks like, I think, is skewed because everybody is so goddamn unhealthy in our population that it's like this we've skewed what we consider to be normal. So there's this new normal.
Yeah.
And it's there's a book that is amazing, and I can't remember if you and I talked about it before, but it's I think it's called Manthropology. I'll have to look it up. But they basically compared modern men to to various other stages in the history of the human race. So they looked at the skeletons of Roman gladiators, Roman legionnaires. They looked at Neanderthals. They looked at Australian Aborigines from 20,000 years ago. And the crux of the story was these ancient humans, which really weren't that ancient. The Roman Empire wasn't that long ago, and these guys were basically Olympic athletes. Their anatomy and their ability to perform feats of athleticism were on par with some of the modern athletes that we see. And so that used to be the norm, pretty much.
Yeah, they were eating real food too.
Real food. Life was very hard.
Yes.
I mean, granted, they died young, but it was probably mostly from infectious diseases, which we've got a handle on that now. But the point is, you compare that to the average couch potato now. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I'll see guys in their early 20s and even teenagers in the emergency room, and they're laying on a gurney, and I ask them to sit up. And I don't help them. I just sit there and I ask them to get up. And some of them, they struggle to sit up on their own without help. I have to pull them up.
Wow.
And this is at age 22. So, what they don't realize is that if you're having that much trouble at 22, getting from a seated to a standing, or laying flat to a standing position, what do you think that's going to be like at 55?
Or just
65?
35.
Or 35, right?
Well,
So,
I think it's all mental. It's just
A lot of it
skewed.
is.
It's skewed. And I don't think it's even maybe their fault. Almost
No.
because life
No,
is
it's
here's
not.
life.
It's-
Here's life. Here's the food that you buy at the grocery store.
Yeah.
And here's it's like the old pyramid, what do they call it? The foods pyramid that's upside down, right?
Right.
And it's we were all trained and just you grow up in this world that is what you eat and this is what you do. You play video games, and the next thing you know, it's out of control.
Exactly.
So you have to be educated at the very lowest level of education about this, not just at 40 years old.
Exactly. and that's where like society has utterly failed, right? Like there's no nutrition classes in grade school. But here's the thing. You know ask me how many nutrition classes I had in medical school.
Probably none.
Boop, zero. Zero. Okay. I did 6 years of residency and 4 years of medical school without a single lecture on nutrition, which is like literally the most important part of your health. Yeah. And in fact, and it was funny because, we would talk about, hey, how do you treat type 2 diabetes? The attending would come and ask you, and your answer is always like, well, we always start with diet and lifestyle. He's like, yep, that's true, very good. Mm-hmm. But then what's the next, then what? But I never asked, and I probably should have, well, what does that look like? Like, what do I tell my patients to eat? Yeah. And they don't know. Yeah. The other doctors don't know.
So it's just trickled down from the leadership. It's just the lack of leadership, which like, there's an opportunity for, there's a massive unlimited market for leadership in this, right? Because I didn't know. And even though I looked like I was in good shape, my diet was awful.
Yeah, and your blood work wasn't great either.
No. But I got some of it, I got some genetic issues, right? Mm-hmm. But the thing is that, I want to touch on the protein side of things too, right? Because I think there's too much, this thing about meat that everybody's talking about. Like, I think we can all agree that, that animals aren't treated, that's a problem. But the fact is that we need animal protein, probably, right? Let's just put it out there. Yeah. And when you eat a lot of protein and hit your goals that you need to, you're not going to be eating the other shit.
Exactly.
Yeah. You're full.
Right.
But when you're eting the carbs, it's like this constant reinforcement of hunger.
Yep.
Anyway.
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, we could do a whole nother podcast on that. We could. Yeah, if someone is an ethical vegan, I have no problem with that. I'm not going to try to talk you out of that if you think it's unethical to eat animals, because your morality is your morality. Mm-hmm. It may not be my morality, and you keep your morality to yourself, and I'll keep mine to myself, and we'll get along. But the reality is that, and I say this to my patients a lot, muscle tissue is the most health promoting tissue in your entire body. Barring the use of like anabolic steroids and stuff like that, the more muscle tissue you have, the healthier you get. And there really is there's no point at which like having, within limits, maximizing muscle tissue on your body becomes a problem. So the more you have, the more insulin sensitive you are, the more the less inflammation you have in your body, and the more likely you are to recover from an injury better, or to avoid an injury entirely. So muscle tissue is super, super important. And I talk about this all the time with my guys. Your job, one of your main jobs, if you want to be an active like 80 or 90-year-old, is you need to maximize your genetic potential in terms of muscle tissue before the age of 50.
Let me ask you this then, because I've been thinking about that. I think about you all the time because I'm going through my routines every day. Mm-hmm. And you were a mentor to me on this part. But I'm like, I have good muscle mass, right? But I hate the way I feel when I lift too heavy with jujitsu. Yeah. So then I'm like, okay, what the hell am I going to do? Do I need more muscle, or is it more maintenance at this level?
It's so, when I say that, it's more of it's sort of a philosophy. It's not, I'm not saying everybody has to look like a pro bodybuilder, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's not compatible with everybody's goals. It's, there was a stage in my life when I was powerlifting where that's all I cared about. Mm-hmm. It was like in the off season, I would get to 260 pounds, like I was eating like,
and then cut.
I was eating like cookie dough, raw cookie dough, in my 20s. And then I would cut to 242s, to compete. Yeah. So, doing that was probably not healthy for me. But when I say maximize muscle tissue, I also mean like within the confines of your own, personal goals and limitations. Sure. Like if you're a marathon runner and you derive joy, like it's from marathon running, and that's a big part of your identity. Okay, that's cool. Like you should totally do that. Yeah. And I understand you're not going to be able to, like, putting 20 pounds of skeletal muscle on is probably going to impair that. So you have to, this is all like, these are all decisions that we have to make. Having said that, if you'd had that extra 20 pounds of muscle and then you fall and break your hip when you're 80, you were probably going to do better if you'd had that 20 pounds of muscle there, because I think about it, you're an investment guy. So muscle tissue is an investment that you put away in the bank.
Interesting.
And
that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, that's how I look at it, because let me tell you a scenario that I see almost on a daily basis in the emergency department. A little old lady who's been dwindling. She lives at home. She's not eating really well. Diet's not that good. She doesn't exercise. She's getting thinner. She's getting frailer. Nobody put her on hormones, so her bones are turning to chalk. And then one day she goes out to get her newspaper and she trips on a garden hose or whatever, falls down, breaks her hip, comes in and sees me. Okay, so I get her admitted to the hospital. She has to get a pin, put in that hip. So before she broke her hip, she had just enough muscle tissue to do her ADLs, which was activities of daily living, meaning she could get up and walk to the bathroom. She could get up and she could sit on the toilet. She could stand up on her own. She had just enough strength to do that. Well, what do you think happens after laying in bed for 2 weeks? So she was just above that threshold where she could take care of herself. And now after 2 weeks in bed with a pin in her hip, now the physical therapist gets her up, and the small amount of muscle mass that she had is now gone. And you lose it so fast in your 80s. So this lady will lose probably 50% of her muscle strength in that 2 weeks.
Wow.
So now, does she get to go home? No. Like, her hip's fixed. She can put weight on it. She can't go home.
Yeah.
Because she can't take care of herself. So what happens? She has to go to a rehab center. And she will be, very likely, she'll be in that rehab center for months.
It's basically the
months.
end of the,
Yeah.
it's just kind of
so
the
that's the
downhill
beginning
slide.
of the end, right? The
of
beginning of the end. So imagine if that lady, or we use a male as an example, it doesn't matter. Let's say she just had 10 or 15 pounds of extra skeletal muscle that she had put in the bank, before the age of 50, and she was still active, lifting, doing resistance training, nothing crazy. She's still going to lose a ton of muscle mass laying in bed for 2 weeks, but she's going to have enough left over from her reserves that, now she actually can take care of herself. She gets to go home. But the other lady A, gets to go to a rehab center. And I could tell you some stories about it. You do not want to go to a rehab center.
Yeah, it doesn't
Unless you're very wealthy, you do not want to. The rehab center you're going to go to, it's not going to be good. And that's where you get a urinary tract infection, you get a blood clot in your leg, and you get pneumonia, and then you die.
Yeah.
So a broken hip in an elderly person is very high morbidity.
It's just the chain reaction.
You start
right
circling
down.
the drain.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the event. And 6 months later, you're probably, there's a good chance you're not going to be around from a complication from that. But having that extra muscle tissue, nobody thinks about this, but if you had that in the bank, so to speak, now you get to go home, and maybe you'd avoid some of those problems, and maybe you can bounce back from that and still have a good quality of life.
Yeah.
So
it's
important.
It's there's just so much, nobody knows this stuff.
Right.
They just
Yeah,
don't.
and it's not it's not human nature to think 40 years in the future. I get it, and so most of the guys that come to me, they want to get jacked and tan, and I'm like, listen, man, I can help you get jacked and tan if you want, but getting jacked and tan, so to speak, is a side effect of these other goals that I actually have for you.
Well, what do those goals look like? That's a good lead into what.
Yeah.
So when I came, I'll just give an example. When I came to you, I was like, I want to feel like a fighter. I want to feel like an athlete, because that's when I feel the best
I totally
mentally,
get
physically.
that.
I'm like, I want to be an athlete.
Right.
I want to be a fighter. I want to
Yeah.
do jiu-jitsu. Help me with my diet, and it was pretty damn simple.
It's not that hard. It's not rocket science.
It's real
right?
simple.
Yeah, I mean, you want to be an athlete, you have to do athletic things.
Yes.
Which you were doing, you're doing jiu-jitsu, but you also have to not get injured. So, that's where some of the strength training comes in, actually. It doesn't just help you perform, on the mat, but it actually reinforces all these skeletal structures that we're trying to pry.
AC
and show.
joints that I had ripped out, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And I have the same problem. But all the injuries that I have would be so much worse if I had never done the strength training. In fact, I don't know that I'd still be doing jiu-jitsu at age, I'll be 51 this year, if I hadn't had this base of, really 30 years of really intense powerlifting and weight training. It caused some problems, but the net benefit for me was definitely way
And
higher.
I'll be honest with you, I've been experimenting with how much lifting versus rolling, and I'm like, stop. I'm like, okay. What happened is that momentum took me in the where I was like, I literally go, I feel better with no weights, but what I felt is now I feel soft, which is going to reverse. I'm going to get hurt. So now I'm going to pick up the kettlebells and just go, okay, I'm going to go into that mode where I'm not doing max lift and trying to get jacked. I'm just trying to know your body.
Yeah. You're going to go through seasons in your jiu-jitsu career where you're going to be more focused on jiu-jitsu, and then the weights are maintenance. And then you might go through periods of time where you're like, you know what, like summer's coming up, I'm going to go heavier on the weights, and then jiu-jitsu is going to be on the back burner for a little while. Like that's happened to me dozens of times over my jiu-jitsu career. And
keep you fresh maybe too.
It's probably good to do that, you know, like
cycle.
There were times where I was getting close, I knew I was getting close to a belt promotion, so my jiu-jitsu would ramp up, and I would just dial my lifting down to just maybe 2 days a week, which is more than enough for to maintain. You're not going to make tons of forward progress, but you can maintain. And then there were times, it was like, hey, summer's coming up, like screw jiu-jitsu, like I need to, put an inch on my lats or whatever, and so you'll focus more on the lifting. So, and it's good. I mean, it's good to, unless you just love that one thing, I think it's good to do both.
Yeah. So, question a lot of people have, because the whole thing, the debate about testosterone is in my age is starting to, for me, I opted to not do it. And let's see what the diet did. And guess what?
Which I love that you did that.
200 points it went up in 3 months because of the change in my diet, which was basically just high protein, low carb. Gosh, I could spin off on this. I want to stay on track, but I want to talk about something, because since I was about 8 or 7 years old, I've had these weird spells, and people, a lot of my friends are going to see this. I hope they watch this, and they're going to make fun of me because they called me hypo in college. Because I would eat, and then I would go to the game, and we'd start playing, and whenever maybe it's my metabolism or whatever, when I'd get exercising and had ate a meal, I literally would get disoriented, felt like a chemical imbalance, and it happened to me since I was 8 years old, and I couldn't figure it out. It was a huge hindrance on my performance because I had to pause for 20 minutes, let it cycle through, and then I feel like crap, but I drink some sugar to kind of...
So you're getting hypoglycemic, presumably?
Well, it was different. The hypoglycemic came after. It was like right after eating and exercise, and what you told me, and after seeing 10 doctors probably about it, and I'm 45 when I talk to you about this, you go, well, there's some new science out that says, your gut...
Is that your impersonation of me?
Yeah.
Is that what I sound like?
but I'll never forget it, because it was like, thank you. I thought that I was going to die over these years. But basically the food that we eat, we have a brain in our gut and all this chemicals or hormones, and that's what it was. So guess what? I basically cut out carbs, except maybe like if I'm not going to exercise, I'll have something like at night or something. But I haven't had one of those spells ever since I went high protein, and not even close. I used to have to manage my life around that, and now it's just gone. So
exactly. So getting back to the testosterone thing, there is a true epidemic of low testosterone. Men's, every decade, and there's dozens of studies showing this decline in men's testosterone. So our generation is less than our dad's, and we are higher than these kids that are coming up right now. And that could be a whole nother podcast of why that's happening. There's not just one thing, it's multiple things. But one of the things, I would say, if a guy goes and gets his testosterone checked and it's low, there is I wouldn't say it's super extensive, but there's a list of serious medical conditions that need to be ruled out, to figure out what's going on. Now, most of the time, it's just not going to be, you're not going to find one of those, and it's what they call idiopathic, and is a lot of times it's lifestyle, it's poor sleep, it's exposure to these endocrine disrupting compounds that you and I have talked about.
The food in our food?
Yeah, we hear about BPA, and all these xenoestrogens that are in plastics and tin can linings and fast food. All of those interfere with testosterone production, testosterone signaling. they're a huge problem. They're a huge, like, unbelievably huge problem. In fact, I'm going to do another podcast on it because the problem is it's just almost impossible to avoid this stuff. You can do certain things to limit your exposure, and now that I've got a baby in the house, we've done some things to try to limit his exposure to all this stuff, but it's everywhere. Like, it's in the water. It's very difficult to get rid of that. So, having said that, though, there is a big part of it that is modifiable. And in your case, you found that eating a healthier diet, you probably dropped body fat.
I did.
Yeah.
Automatically.
Yeah. So their body fat in and of itself, especially visceral body fat, which is
inside.
It's the fat that's you have your subcutaneous body fat underneath your skin, but the stuff that really is harmful to your health is inside, like around
the organs.
Yeah, it's organ fat, right? So people don't know this, but fat is an endocrine organ. So it secretes well over 100 different hormones. They call them adipokines, and all of them in excess, except for 2, are bad for you. Okay, to some extent or another, including they will shut down the signal in your pituitary gland and your hypothalamus to tell your testicles to make testosterone. So that's this LH and FSH level. And so if you can lower your visceral body fat percentage through lifestyle factors, sometimes you will get a nice little bump in your testosterone.
That's what I had. You said my brain was telling I need more testosterone,
Exactly.
and my testicles were not producing
They were like,
it.
meh.
Yeah, and so the numbers got in line. It wasn't hard.
Yeah, it's not as difficult as people think. Now, the reality of life is that there are men who will make these lifestyle changes and still not get a good improvement in their testosterone levels. Or they won't, let's put it this way, they're so low to begin with that they won't raise them enough so that they're no longer symptomatic. And so that's where, a doctor has to sit down with them, like you and I did, and have a very lengthy discussion about the pros and cons of, do you do testosterone replacement? Do you not? And I honestly try to talk guys out of it more than I try to talk them into it.
Yeah.
Because everybody, if you get on social media, everybody knows the pros. They see these Instagram influencers and they're all in great shape and they're all on testosterone. The fact is, most of those guys are on a little bit more than just TRT, right? There's a little bit more going on there. But there's this, this false idea that getting on TRT is going to solve all your problems, right? Your life's going to be great. Chicks are going to come out of the woodwork, and your relationship's going to get better. You're going to get abs. And the reality is, it's like all those problems that you had before TRT are still going to be there. It just, now you perhaps are going to feel a little bit better and you can do the work. So, testosterone, there's this guy, Dave Lee, that is very insightful online, and he talks about, he says, testosterone gives you the results that you deserve. So you can make some dramatic
You've got to earn it.
You've got to earn it, right?
Yeah, just like anything else.
Yeah, if you keep eating Cheetos and you get on testosterone and you don't do anything, you're not, in fact, you're probably going to harm your health. Because you'll get all of the negative consequences of TRT, but very few of the positive ones. So it allows you, what it does is sometimes gives guys a kick in the pants to get off the couch and do what they need to do.
Maybe it gives them the
mental drive and clarity. And the motivation to do the lifestyle stuff, which is really what they need to do to fix their health and fix their lives. So
and it starts with.
So there's a role there for TRT. I'm a big proponent of it. I've been on TRT for 12 years, and it radically changed my life. It's actually one of the reasons I got into men's health is because of my own medical issues. That testosterone was part of fixing that. So I am a big believer in it, but I'm not a salesman for testosterone. In fact, like I said, I try to give guys an accurate picture, because again, they all know the positive. Very few of them understand the negatives, that come along with.
Like the I don't know if it's called dependency, but basically you stop producing testosterone.
Correct. You will shut down your own natural production. Now,
how long does it take to come back?
So it highly varies. It's variable. So the younger you are, and the shorter the duration of your exposure to testosterone, the quicker it's going to come back. So, a 22-year-old gets on, a cycle of steroids for 3 months. Yeah, probably within 6 months, he's going to have a decent level back. Maybe it's not going to be back where it was, but it'll be pretty close. I use myself as an example. At age 50, after being on TRT for 12 years, I've probably burned that bridge.
So you're
Meaning,
on.
like, I will never. Now, my levels were like sub 300 when I started.
Interesting.
So,
And you were a big lifter
yeah.
and everything.
Oh, yeah.
too,
But
so.
I had a medical issue. So I had a genuine medical issue that was irreversible. And so, but in terms of getting back to even to that level of 300, it probably wouldn't happen for me.
Yeah.
At my age and after being on for 12 years. So guys have to understand that. Yeah,
It's a commitment.
it's a commitment. I won't say it's completely a one-way street because you can come off of testosterone. There are ways to safely discontinue testosterone and then sort of reboot your hypothalamus to a certain extent, but that's not always successful. And I tell guys, like, don't count on that.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, you kind of have to know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
And the fertility part of it is huge. It will shut down your sperm counts.
So also the relativity of it, it's relative, right? So like you could have a low testosterone count, but the way your body, I don't
Absolutely.
even know the word for it,
Yeah.
but yeah.
No, yeah, exactly. One is the sensitivity of the androgen receptor. So it's not just the level that's floating in your blood, but it's the actual receptor that it binds to. If there's a problem with that interaction, like maybe you genetically have a receptor that just doesn't bind very well, you may start feeling poorly at a level of 500, or 450.
So it's basically free. Is it different? I mean, there's different there. But
Yeah,
what
there's
is it?
free- there's free
You can
tes-
have the testosterone, but it's not doing. It's not connecting.
Yeah. I mean, it's the way that you feel has a lot more to do with the way that testosterone interacts with this receptor, and then it binds to the DNA in your cell. It's like incredibly complicated. So it's not. So guys tell me, like, hey man, what should my levels be? I'm like, your levels should be
Symptomatic.
It should be above whatever your symptom threshold is.
I was worried my head would blow up. People were like, you should go on testosterone. People who know me,
You
they're
look
like,
like Joe
dude,
Rogan.
they're like, no, they're just like, no, I meant like mentally.
Oh,
like,
mentally, yeah.
Because
No.
I feel good.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm going to go off of.
Yeah.
I'm not closing the door to it, but I feel pretty good.
You can always, it's something actually you should, as guys get older, it's just, check your cholesterol, check your testosterone level if you want to.
Yeah.
But you're right. Like I routinely see guys in the 300s, which or below the normal reference range who feel fine. In fact, I've got a good buddy of mine who's a physician, and he's a couple years older than me, and his testosterone levels are in the 200s. And so I ran through the checklist with him. I was
Even
like,
the sexual side?
all of it.
So he's still
fine.
sexual?
Yeah. He's an animal.
He's an animal.
He's an animal. So he says. And so actually, I know I've known him and his wife for a very long time, and they're pretty blunt. So yeah, it sounds like things are going great. So I can only assume that he has a very sensitive androgen receptor. He's like, I joke, like he's the Prius.
It's just like,
Yeah, so he doesn't
everything.
need very much. Like whatever he has, it gets fully utilized.
Yeah.
But then you can imagine there's a guy on the other side of that bell curve who he's going to need a level of 600, 700. And really we can get into this later perhaps, but it's the free testosterone. It's not the total. I don't care what your total is. I really am more interested in what your free testosterone is. That's what's actually
what's
available.
a quick difference, real quick?
So basically, the free testosterone is not bound to any proteins. When it's bound to a protein, which is usually SHBG, but also albumin in your blood, your body can't use it. It's like it's blind. It doesn't, like, your body cannot see it. Although technically that's not true. There's some data that shows that's probably it is complicated. Everything's complicated, right? It's never that simple. But to simplify it, there are small amounts of testosterone that are just dissolved in your bloodstream, and they're not attached to anything else, and those are the ones, that's what your body can utilize. So when it's bound to a protein, it's like this big reservoir of testosterone that's put away behind a wall. It's behind a paywall.
Gotcha.
You can't get to it.
Okay.
It's only the stuff that's free.
Okay.
So, and that's what correlates most with symptoms. Is the free.
Yeah, we could go on forever.
Yeah. There's a lot of nuances with TRT, and that's why like I've taken hundreds of hours of like CME credits to learn this stuff because it's I got no lectures in nutrition or TRT in medical school. You
and
have
it's
to
kind
learn
of a new topic that people are starting. People, maybe because I was younger and I didn't hear about it, but I never really have heard of like Jose Canseco is on a show and he's like, I got low testosterone. And you look at him, you're like, you got to be kidding me.
Right.
he's jacked.
Yeah,
you know? I don't have sex because I have low testosterone. So they went to the doctor and went through the whole.
He had
that's
low
how it hurt.
testosterone probably from other
Roids?
things. Yeah, the other things he was doing, because that's a thing.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
But yeah, no, it's very complex, and you know, your average physician who's not an endocrinologist or a urologist has almost no training in it. So I hear the stories that guys get frustrated when they go to their primary care doctor and they get blown off, and they're like, sometimes they even refuse to check it. And I try to like talk them down. I'm like, so don't be mad at your doctor. Like, it's not in their wheelhouse. Like, you can't expect them to know this. Again, getting back to my own training, your family doctor spent 7 years learning how to take care of grandma's diabetes. Okay, not to optimize your testosterone level as a 30-year-old male. Like, that's not what they spent 7 years of training doing. So don't expect them to, you know, boom, be able to, unless they've done the work on their own.
Set the expectations, right? Like, and that's what's so cool.
And keep them low.
Yeah, totally get it. And
Keep them low.
No, so we could talk forever. It's a good time to end it, but let's do it again, maybe in a few months, and then
anytime.
I'd love to come on yours too at some point. But man, this was really good, and unlimited market for what you provide.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah.
It's shocking to me though how this is a situation where the need is very, very high, but it can sometimes be very difficult to convince people to be interested in it. You know,
I think it's changing though, because I think that it's more out there, and people are just like, you know, do you want to live?
Yeah. Well, there is a group, you know, there's a population of people who are just a little bit more medically sophisticated that understand, you know, cause and effect. But it's so interesting in the emergency department. I see guys on their 4th and 5th heart attacks in their 50s, and I'm like, what's it going to take?
They just
for you,
and nothing maybe.
Like is it the 6th one that's going to get you to like stop eating hot dogs and, you know, be 300 pounds? And so, you know, it's different for each person, but I don't know, a lot of people have just given up.
Yeah,
they just think it's inevitable.
Yeah. Well, I think going back to what I said is that, and you said the normal. This is just life.
Yeah, it's just
this is life, and I'm just going to go through life.
Yeah.
And you know, if you want something out of your life, and you want different,
right.
It starts with your mental and physical health. It doesn't go. It's not, I'm going to go start a business, and I'm going to that thing I want to do, that marathon I want to run, or whatever. It doesn't. That's after.
Yeah.
Get your shit together.
Yeah. But the beauty of doing this, you know, and I call my practice, it's age management, you know, and it's not a testosterone practice. So if you do all this stuff, you know, you can at age 50 or 60 do a career change, because you still have the energy and the health and the motivation. You know, like if you want to go back to grad school at 50, you know, my dad did 30 years in the State Department, and then at 56 went to law school. You know, and he wasn't on any kind of an age management program, but that's the kind of, you know, most, at least in the emergency department, the population, when they're in their 50s, they're done. Like they've given their life, they have resigned themselves a lot of times to just this downward. And I'm just, it's sad, because I'm like, if you had put the effort in at age 50, again, you should be in the prime of your life in your 50s and 60s, and to the point where you can have a complete career change. You can go back to school at age 60 and have a whole nother 30 years of like productive life.
That's awesome.
If you want to.
Yeah.
But the majority of people, again, in my ER practice, I mean, honestly, at age 60, they're like 1 foot in the grave. Most of them are 1 foot in the grave. They're not. None of them are working anymore because they're just too sick to work. So they've, you know, they're basically fully dependent on other people. By the time it starts in their 50s, that's when things really get bad. And then by the time they're 60, they're dependent on the state, you know, to take care of them.
Well, let's just hope that this is a cycle that we had to go through, right?
Yeah. Well, it's not sustainable, right?
We had to we have to see this wave of failure before people go, well, dude, I'm going to be 60 when my kids get out of high school. 61 actually. So it's like, I'm in.
Right. Yeah, it's very motivating. I mean, you've got kids. I've got an infant at home at age 50. So like, if I wasn't motivated before, I need to keep up with him. You know, I need to be tapping him out, you know, when he's a teenager. And I don't know how, I'm still thinking of how I'm going to do that. But, you know, I'm motivated to do that because I'm an older dad, you know.
Yeah.
So I need to be present
Good.
for him, and I can't do that if I'm in a wheelchair. you
Yeah,
know.
no, totally.
So.
Well, thanks for coming on,
Yeah,
man.
man, thanks for
we'll do
having
it
me.
again.
We'll do it again. Thanks
All
so
right, man.
much.
See ya.
Yep.